Time now to welcome in CBS Sports women's basketball analyst Terrika Ayala to break it all down. And my goodness, let me be the first one to say, I was wrong because after that Final Four game, I was like, I don't see South Carolina getting belt to ass the way that it happened in February. But then, of course, UConn does exactly that, and now they have their 12th national championship. What was the most impressive part about what you saw from UConn in getting this title?
It was relentless basketball. It was UConn basketball. This is a team that is very disciplined. They're poised under pressure. Again, they know how to win. They come from a pedigree, a history of winning and setting the pace for women's basketball. And this was a return to that. Some folks might have forgotten. Maybe they just are coming to the women's basketball party. And now y'all know UConn is that team, as you mentioned, setting a new record when it comes to NCAA championships for all of NCAA basketball. Geno, Auriemma, Chris Daly have built a strong foundation, and it was that return that we saw. And what does that look like? It looks like one of your freshmen being your top scorer.
You said strong foundation, right? I saw what you were doing there, right? So she is the first UConn freshman ever to record a double-double in the national championship game. And I don't think we should be surprised, right, at this point. It's her versatility, her IQ. How did she really dominate this game on both ends of the ball?
Well, if you talk about the offense first, Sarah Strong has been able to knock down perimeter shots for a Huskies team that didn't get their first three-pointer until well into the first half of the game. And then she comes into the second half, and now you have a player that can beat you in the paint, knock you down defensively on the block, and now is pulling up and taking three-pointers? Come on, that's a big defensive task for an opposition, and South Carolina was that team today. Just amazing. Also, great blocks.
Oh, yeah.
Timely. You know, I love talking about timely plays. The blocks that we saw from Sarah Strong, knocking the wind sometimes out of South Carolina, and she just did it all around.
Yeah, she was electric. 24 points, 15 rebounds, 3 blocks. And Azzi Fudd, the last time we saw her in a national championship game, it was against South Carolina in 2022. 16 minutes, only 3 points. And I know she was dealing with an illness. This time, she's like, look, like her mom on her shirt, fud around and find out, okay? And the interesting thing, Terrika, is that you spoke to her about a year ago about the mentality of this team. Can you shed some light on what she saw?
Yes, I did. I was able to speak to Azzi Fudd, and the mentality that she was taking coming into this UConn season is, we're not talking about it. I'm not talking about my injuries. I'm not talking about the chase, the quest for a championship. I'm getting in the gym. I'm putting my head down. I'm focused on communicating with my teammates so that every day we get the job done. And that's exactly what this UConn team did. The focus, wanting to make sure it was insular. It was about UConn Huskies basketball and nothing else. In an age of NIL, when you play at a team or at a program, like UConn, there's a lot of attention that you get, and rightfully so. But for Azzi Fudd to want to hunker down and focus on making the main thing, and articulating that so early, overcoming what we thought was an injury scare early on. Those are the things that, as a journalist, as someone who's able to speak to players, you remember those things, and you see the greatness that it takes, the concentration that it takes to be great. And Azzi Fudd did that. She wanted to make sure it was focused, and she knew it was no guarantee, but it was what she could control to get UConn back to not just a title game, but to a championship win.
Right, and it was very convincing. And of course, we have to talk about Paige Bueckers. She is an all-time college basketball legend, even without a title on this night. But she gets it done, her first one, and she didn't have to be, 40-point Paige in this one. So speak to how efficient she is and just the way she manages the game, even when she's not scoring at a high clip.
It's her leadership. What she's able to do, she's a true lead guard, floor general, whatever you want to call it. she does that in not just how she contributes, as you mentioned, offensively or even defensively, the way she pours into this team, the way she has confidence and gives them perhaps the confidence when they waver is incredible. She's a true leader out there. She's a special star at a special program at a special time in women's basketball. That's Paige Bueckers. And you see that her joy, she subbed out her last minutes in this game and emotional immediately, embracing her head coach. And after that, it's just celebrating with her team. I really am excited to see how Paige continues to grow. We know her next stop is coming up soon. We've got the WNBA draft coming up soon, but if she can continue to grow in that aspect, that's what makes you a person who can be a part of championship culture and to bring championship culture to places, because she is a champion now officially, but she's always had that mentality, Chris.
Right, always had it, and now the hard work has finally paid off in the Huskies getting their 12th national title, most titles in men or women's NCAA tournament history, surpassing the UCLA Bruins with 11 on the men's side. Tennessee, Kentucky, they're a little bit farther off, 8 and 8 for the women and the men respectively. And as we turn this page, right, back to South Carolina and the season, not even the season, but just the last few years that Dawn Staley has had with this program, kind of making them, I won't say the modern version of UConn or Tennessee, but how do you think Dawn Staley is going to digest this loss as she looks ahead for a very interesting offseason in looking to get back to a national championship?
That is the question, and you and I were speaking as we were watching the game. For me, again, this is a UConn team that it's almost like you're jumping in the ocean and you get hit by one wave and you're like, okay, regain my strength here, regain my footing, but another and another and another. That's difficult, and this is what you have to prepare for when you're not just playing against UConn, but in today's women's basketball, because it's not just UConn that can put on a hurting like that. And so for Dawn Staley, for South Carolina, it's just re-emphasizing what they've already started to build, which is their own version of championship culture. And they can absolutely do that. But sometimes you lose. Sometimes you lose games. Sometimes you get your butt whooped. And we talked about this, that hurt heart space. It builds the fortitude, it builds the resilience, and it provides you the experience that you need to do as much as possible in the off season and certainly in the game to make sure it doesn't happen again and that you reach your goals as a team.
So in order for them to make sure it doesn't happen again, obviously they're going to need to shoot better next season, get some tighter ball security. But if there's one thing you could point to, Erica, that they really need to foster, because they return a lot of the players I know. Sanaya Fagan, she's had an incredible career. Bree Hall, 4 straight Final Fours, 2 chips. What's one aspect that you would like South Carolina to address if it's in the portal?
I think it goes back to being able to, as you said, shoot, but also it's the versatility. We saw, again, what Sarah Strong was able to do. That's where the game is. You need 1 through 5 at any given time to be able to contribute, not just on the block, not just in the mid-range, but to stretch the defense and have the confidence and also be able to knock down, not just have the confidence to shoot, I should say, but also be able to knock down perimeter shots. That is where all of basketball is. It's certainly where the women's game is. And so for South Carolina, that at times has been something, not just this season, but that perhaps was a little bit of a question mark. So many people have talked about also what they did have and maybe didn't have this year when it comes to the post. So these are all things, but more so it's about making sure that you manage the right balance for the crew that you have coming in. And sometimes, Chris, that means that it's not about getting someone in the portal necessarily to do any of the things that we just mentioned, but it's also challenging the players that you have on your roster to be able to step up in those moments and at minimum be able to keep defenses honest because they have stretched their game. And that's what I'm thinking Dawn Staley and South Carolina will focus on.
Yeah, Dawn Staley, South Carolina, they're not going anywhere. But as you mentioned, Erica, Tonight just wasn't their night. UConn was the best team. They looked like the most consistent team all throughout the tournament, and that is why they are the national champs. Also, Tahina Pau, she's also going to be graduating, so they're going to have to replace her shooting. And as you look at the largest wins in national title game history on the women's side, listen, UConn at one point, it looked like they were going to surpass the mark they set in 2013 against Louisville with 33, but they get 23 against South Carolina here. They also did against my Syracuse Orange 2016, a 31-point victory. And now everybody knows UConn is the top dog once again, something that we've said for so long. And we're back here with Terrika Ayala, and so much has been talked about when it comes to Paige Bueckers' legacy, her career at UConn. She finally is a national champion, and you just could tell that this was something that they were prepared for. They were on a mission. It was completely different than the previous years. So when you look at her in terms of all the UConn greats, where does she stack up, Terrika?
She's very special. I will start by stating the obvious. I think for some people, is she the best player? When you have Breanna Stewart, who brought home 4 titles consecutive, that's a little bit of a high bar, I think. And what I will say is that she's in that upper echelon, tied with Maya Moore for the fastest to 1,000 points. She is the leader in the fastest in program history to 2,000 points. She set an assist record in a single season her freshman year. So these are special things that Paige Bueckers has been able to do. We know, of course, with the conference change back to the Big East, she's also hit some history there as well. I think that she's got to be top 5 when it comes to UConn history, because it's not just about the titles, it's not just about where she sits in the record books, but she has a championship now. She is in the record books, the UConn record books, but it's also the overall impact. We talked about so much of impact and what it means for women's basketball when we talked about Caitlin Clark last year. And if Caitlin Clark is arguably one of the most impactful players in women's basketball history, then no doubt that Paige Bueckers, especially for UConn, is that, and arguably that she's that for women's basketball as well.
100%. She's had such a profound impact on the sport of women's basketball. And her teammate, AZ Fudd, and also best friend, she was named Final Four's most outstanding player. Just a great redemption story for both of these players, right? Because they've been injured. You're not sure how you're going to come back. Those knee injuries, they can be scary. That is why you have to give them so much respect for the way they dedicated themselves on their rehab, getting back to this point. Geno Auriemma, right? People consider him the GOAT, you know, in some circles as in women's basketball, right? And maybe even just overall. But when you think about him finally getting this title after such a long period where they couldn't taste a national championship, how does this just enhance his legacy?
And I'm glad you used the word enhance, because even if there was a world in which Geno Auriemma had retired from coaching at UConn, even if we can even imagine a world where he's still coaching and not with the Huskies, for me, that doesn't change his legacy. It wouldn't have changed his legacy if UConn had fallen to South Carolina today. He's already the leader in most wins in all of NCAA basketball. Hit that milestone alongside Chris Daly earlier this season. And we know what that UCLA men's team was able to do and how they did it and how they changed how people perceived and how they went about building basketball programs. It's precisely what Geno Auriemma, Chris Daly, and the UConn Huskies have done in women's basketball. And so the legacy, this is now just creating even more separation when it comes to Geno's legacy, when it comes to the legacy of UConn. Didn't need it, and UConn continues to pace. They are setting the pace for women's basketball and how we define greatness. Will a record like this ever be reached? Will we ever see one coach stay at one program for 40-plus seasons? I don't think we will. I don't think we will. And then that becomes, you know, how do we then provide a GOAT when it comes to a coach in women's basketball. Those are conversations for another day. But right now, yes, it is Geno Auriemma, it is Chris Daly, it is the UConn Huskies program.
And I'm glad you brought up Chris Daly because she doesn't get enough respect for what she's done for that UConn program. And interestingly enough, right, Geno Auriemma was undefeated in national title games before they took on South Carolina in 2022. Dawn Staley was undefeated coming into this night in national championship games. And then, of course, UConn says, oh, we're going to return the favor. Like, UConn back on top, 12 titles. Tennessee trailing them by 4. South Carolina tied with Stanford and double digits. And you know, we heard Dawn Staley talking in the press conference there, Erica, you know, about this senior class. They're the winningest class, right? You talk about Raven Johnson, you talk about Sanaya Fagan, Bree Hall. And so you move on from such a decorated and talented group of players. So when you look ahead to what's next for them, is it a matter of retooling in your eyes?
In some ways, yes. Every year, especially for NCAA programs, is a little bit of a retool. You have players that are going to graduate out. You have the transfer portal that Dawn Staley and her staff will have to deal with inevitably. But let's not forget, this is a team that has gone to 5 straight Final Fours. This is a team that came in as the reigning NCAA champion. So this is a team, this is a program that is building something special. Dawn Staley is building something special. And when you go up against a team like UConn, there's just so much history on UConn's side. Then you bring in a freshman like Sarah Strong. You bring in a generational talent like Paige Beckers. It can be a distraction away from what South Carolina has also built and having fantastic players that have come through that program, what Dawn Staley has built. And that's why I loved what we heard from Bree Hall, just talking about, listen, it's disappointing to lose, but I can't be in this moment overly sad. I am grateful for being able to win 2 national titles. I am grateful for being able to see this program rise to where it is. And so I think, to answer your question again, is it a retool? I think it is, because that's what championship pedigree is all about. You have already laid the foundation. You are a team that people are going to want to come to, whether it's through the transfer portal or coming in as new recruits. And so now it's, yes, retooling again, going back to the players who played in this game. We heard, you know, Joyce say that, I know what this feels like, and I don't want to feel this way again. And that's the retool, that's the refiring, and going back to the foundation that you laid as South Carolina.
Right, because she and her staff, they have built such a great culture there where you want to play for Dawn Staley, not just because of what she's going to do to you as a basketball player, but just as a person, right? It's a very holistic approach. You get the family involved, making sure they're on board. But one thing I do want to talk about, Erica, is going into this season, there were questions, oh, you know, South Carolina, they don't have a dominant big, right? They don't have a Cardoso, they don't have a Boston, they don't have an Asia Wilson. Ashton Watkins goes down, right, during SEC play. They're like, oh yeah, South Carolina, they're cooked. And yet, they still made it to the national championship game, even playing some of their underwhelming performances leading up to the national championship game. So how would you categorize this coaching job by Dawn Staley?
I think it's fantastic, because we hear it in sports all the time, next player up. And certainly no one is going to feel sorry for the defending champions coming in. Oh, you lost some players. Oh, maybe you don't have a dominant post. Well, that's good for the rest of the fields, right? Or that's what people are thinking. So it's a next player up. It's, again, controlling the controllables, do what you can do. And that's, again, why you want to build that into your players. Whether you're winning, whether you're losing, doesn't matter who you have on the bench, because nobody cares. We've heard that a few times in the tournament. Nobody cares. No one is going to feel sorry that you don't have your best lineup. It's a matter of what you do when that's the case, when you're hurt, when maybe the foul calls aren't going your way, when the shots aren't falling to the point of your perimeter shooting, 25% or so. That's not where South Carolina wants to be. What didn't happen in this game is being able to adapt. And that's again, where the retool comes from a mentality perspective. That's where it comes from. Are there players on our roster that exist in our program now that just need to expand their game a little bit more so that if we find ourselves in that position again, Chris, we're ready for it?
If there's one player who you're really locking in on to expand their game for next season, of course, Ashton Watkins will be back. They've got some great recruits coming in. Mylasia Fulwiley, Tessa Johnson, Raven Johnson, I think will be back. We're not sure. Who's that one player?
If I had to go one player, Fulwiley seems like the obvious example, but I'm actually going to lean into Tessa here because you have a player like Mylasia Fulwiley, for the most part, you are expecting a certain thing. But again, when it comes to programs like South Carolina, you need to have players that don't need to score and drop 40 every night, but can do that for your team if your opponent is taking everything else away. And for me, she's that player for Dawn Staley.
So she's that player, and you know, it's something that is going to be talked about, right? The lack of timeouts, I guess. Do you have any second thoughts about Dawn maybe calling time? Because you know, there have been really great articles written about the art of the timeout with Dawn Staley and how she wanted her players, she wanted to play through mistakes as a player. And so she's kind of doing the same as a coach where she's able to read body language. Did you take any issue with that, or you just felt like, yeah, they were taking some good shots, they just were not able to hit it?
For me, and we talked a little bit about this while watching the first half, I think that in a game, in a championship game, and against a program like UConn, you sometimes need to take those timeouts. That being said, that's for me coming from the studio. Dawn Staley, I trust that she knows her team. And if that's their process, if that's their language, if that's how they've decided to communicate, then that's it. If they want to work through the challenges, then that's what they're going to do. But we did hear from the players in the post-game press conference that at some time now, they were asked this. They didn't offer it freely, but they were asked, was there a point in time where you felt this game was getting away from you? And the answer was yes. Now, then they shifted to talk about what they need to do and how they need to prepare. But that is what we saw. That was that wave after wave after wave hitting you. That's UConn basketball. So for me, I think that regardless of perhaps some of those, you have to make that executive decision. And it just seemed like her team was starting to feel the fatigue of playing UConn. And sometimes it's just a matter of letting them breathe, reset. Maybe you don't say anything in that huddle and timeout. You let them still figure it out, but you take the timeout. Because it's not just about your team, but it's about stopping the run coming from the other direction. Right,
absolutely. And now, South Carolina, you talked about it, they have to retool. They need to adapt, right, better for next season. And the transfer portal, they've been linked, you know, to Tanaya Latson, the nation's leading scorer. Remember, Raven Johnson played with her. Mylasia also did, going back to high school in their AAU days. Who do you think they should go after on their short list?
Wow, I mean, there's so many names in the portal that it's tough to pick just one. But I think if you need to go with a player that can create, that seemed like what was missing perhaps in this game. Chloe Kitts has done that at times for South Carolina, but that was taken away. Now, there's an argument to be made whether you want that to be someone in the backcourt or someone who can play on the block. As you just mentioned, a lot of conversation. No Asia Wilson, no Aaliyah Boston, no Camila Cardozo. So is that where they want to go? I mean, I don't have an opinion one way or another, but for me, either way, you go out and you get yourself a true scorer, someone that can put that ball down on the hardwood and create buckets when you need them.
100%, because as we've seen, if you can create buckets like Sarah Strong, AZ Fudd, you're going to be in good hands as South Carolina suffers their first loss in the national championship game. They were previously 3-0, but UConn takes away that undefeated streak from South Carolina. And with that, we welcome in Hailey, Sutton, and Terrika Foster-Brasby, who are doing a wonderful job for CBS Sports HQ out there in Tampa. And Hailey, this game was tight, close, but then UConn, they just seemed poised to get the job done, not just for Paige, but themselves. Take it away, Hailey.
Yeah, Chris, to your point, this game was close through that first quarter, and then things changed in the second. UConn taking over, and Terrika, for the first time in Tampa Final Four history, a non-1 seed has won this tournament. It is the UConn Huskies. They came out and dominated. They just got finished cutting down the nets, but Terrika, obviously, this one belongs to the Huskies. What'd you think about the
dominated their way through this tournament? I mean, you mentioned it. There was a very tight first quarter, and I was thinking this is going to come down to the wire, but really it was the third quarter when they really just busted open. It was a 26-16 point differential in that third quarter, and honestly that was a pivotal moment. We had already seen some players step up big, but it just felt like the lead got so insurmountable that South Carolina just couldn't figure out how to claw their way back in.
Well, we've been talking all weekend long about how South Carolina can't afford to get out to a slow start, and today, ironically, they kept up with UConn in that first quarter. But you mentioned it, the third quarter really was the difference here. What changed for the Huskies in the second half?
Well, really, it was AZ Fudd, and it wasn't necessarily about what changed for them. It was just what was elevated for them. AZ Fudd was already coming to this game off a stellar performance in the semifinals, and she had a strong backup in Sarah Strong, and surely enough, she had her back again today. Earlier in this matchup, Paige Beckers didn't even have a double-digit point score going into halftime. It was the AZ Fudd and Sarah Strong show, and so going into that third quarter, it just seemed as if they elevated their offense to a new level. Not that South Carolina wasn't doing their best defensively. It was just a bit more than they could handle.
To your point, Sarah Strong, 24 points, Paige Becker, 17, and our most outstanding player in AZ Fudd finished with 24. You don't need to add to Geno Auriemma's legacy, right? But I mean, bringing home title number 12 to Stores, that speaks volumes to what he's been able to do, not just with this program, but in women's basketball history. What does this victory mean for Geno?
You know what? I was sitting in the up in the suite a little earlier as we were watching some parts of the game, and I was talking to a former player for Geno, Auriemma, and Bria Hartley. And as I was talking to Bria, she says, you know, it was halftime, and I said, what's Geno saying up there at the half? And she said, not much. Not much at all.
He was chilling.
He's chilling. He's telling you to keep your foot on the gas and really just continue to play your game. And I think that speaks to his legacy. He doesn't have to do much. He doesn't have to say much. But he just continues to win. He continues to show excellence. He continues to set a standard for the young women that come into his program. And I think that's what this does. It continues to add to the long legacy. I mean, here in Tampa, you can see Breanna Stewart's here, Morgan Tuck's here, you know, going back to Ashley Battle, Sue Bird, Diana Taurasi. Maya Moore, who's a Hall of Famer, is also here. And it's like these people continue to come out and show love to Geno because it just continues to speak to who he is and what his legacy is. There's a standard of winning, there's a culture of winning, and now a championship resides again in Stores.
You know, you mentioned him being cool, calm, and collected, but there was a moment when his superstar, Paige Beckers, came off of the floor. They had that hug. It was emotional. He has whispered in press conferences how much he is going to miss Paige, and we saw how emotional she was as well, finally getting that national title.
Yeah.
When you think about all that she has been through, the ACL tears, working her way back and ending her career with a national championship, how do you contextualize what she's been able to do?
Well, yesterday, you know, Paige Becker said, if I think about my legacy, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I want to be remembered as a good teammate. I want to be remembered as a good leader. And that's what leaders do, so much so to where Geno Auriemma has had to tell her throughout the course of this season, hey, listen, sis, I know you like to pass the ball, but I need you to shoot some time.
We need you to shoot, girl.
Need you to shoot the ball. And so I think that is exactly the kind of person that Paige is and what her legacy is going to speak at the University of Connecticut is that she was a great leader. She was a great teammate. She continued to motivate. She continued to step up and lead by example. And this was just another issue of that. As happy as they were today, Paige Beckers was the one who led the stat sheet, and yet and still this team collectively came together to celebrate what ended up being a dominant performance.
Well, we're excited to welcome Paige Beckers to Dallas when she becomes that #1 overall pick in the WNBA draft. Terrika, before we go, obviously South Carolina on the other side of this one, Dawn Staley's first loss in a championship game. They had an incredible season as well, too. We know that some of those players will be coming back. What can you say about the season they had?
incredible season. And I say that wholeheartedly and passionately because this South Carolina team, once again, was a team that typically feels invincible. But they showed vulnerability this year. They showed some sort of a weakness at times this year, and they didn't let it stop them. They continued to battle through it. They continued to take the criticism. They continued to put that thing on their shoulders, and they were stronger and better each and every time after it. And you have to appreciate the kind of team that means that Dawn is building over there. She has a lot to be proud of. This team has a lot to be proud of, and they have a lot to look forward to. They also have a freshman in Joyce Edwards who is incredible and has shown a lot of maturity, a lot of adaptability, and a lot of strength throughout this tournament. So their future is incredibly bright. South Carolina ain't going nowhere.
Joyce Edwards also selected to the all-tournament team. But I tell you what, Chris, this day belongs to the UConn Huskies. I'm going to grab some of this confetti down here and throw it up. And we'll send things back to you in the studio as the UConn Huskies are your 2025 national champions.
Thank you so much, Hailey and Terrika, as UConn gets their 12th national title. And you ladies have done a sensational job all week long. We really appreciate your efforts. Get some rest and continue to enjoy the celebration. And look at this, people. UConn tied for the third largest win in a national title game. The most was in 2013 when they dismantled Louisville by 33. Then you have to go back to, or ahead to UConn and Syracuse with 31. And then Tennessee, Louisiana Tech, along with UConn, South Carolina, a 23-point victory for Tennessee and the Huskies in those games.